Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.
Okay, so today in the committee we will consider oral evidence from the Ulster Anglian Federation on SL1s for the implementation of the Reservoirs Act Northern Ireland 2015. Consider 2 proposals for statutory rules subject to assembly procedure, and consider 4 statutory rules and 2 proposals for statutory rules not subject to assembly procedure. So we proceed through the agenda now. So I don't have any apologies, but I have Mark, Nicola and John joining us online. Declarations of interest are remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any member have any interest that they wish to declare at this stage? I just have one. It is in relation to, there's obviously correspondence there in relation to land agents, and the A5 project is going on, so I just want to declare an interest that my husband's family are landowners along the route. Okay, moving on now to chairperson's business. You'll be aware, members, that the PSNI Road Policing and Safety Unit had Operation Lifesaver operating during April over the Easter period to conduct road safety operations. And if you followed Facebook or social media or seen any media reports over that time, I think you will have been shocked, like me, in relation to the amount of people that were caught speeding or uninsured driving or poorly maintained vehicles. And obviously this committee has taken a very keen interest in road safety. Members, sadly, you know, in 2025 already, and as of yesterday, the 29th of April, there's already been 13 fatalities to date on our roads, which is, I'm sure you'll agree, a huge figure for this time of the year already. So in this regard, I'm seeking agreement from members or your views that we write to the PSNI to seek detail on the number and range of offences that were detected during Operation Lifesaver, so that the committee can seek and gain a clearer understanding of the nature of offences and consider any next steps. Maybe also looking into whether they intend to do another type of operation like Operation Lifesaver, because I know myself, I've seen quite a lot of resource on the roads around April and around the Easter period of time, and I want to thank the police for the work that they did carry out over that time as well, because it is about keeping people safe on the roads is a main thing, and hopefully it will have reduced and acted as a deterrent for people on the roads as well. So are members content with that, or does anybody want to add anything? Cahill?
Chair, no, just to declare I'm on the policing board, but I would support that proposal, Chair.
Just to be there, I'm on the policing board as well, so myself, Cahill, and probably Mark will hear more, Keith as well, we'll probably hear more information about that, but I think as a committee it'd be really important. But we had Sam Donaldson in who told us about Operation Lifesaver before it was actually launched, so any further information about how that went or information that we should have as a committee would be really helpful. Yeah.
Content? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we'll now move on to the draft minutes. At page 7 you'll see draft minutes of the proceeding on the 9th of April 2025. So I'm just seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 9th of April 2025. If so, I'll sign the minutes now. Are you content?
Great.
Super, thank you. Item 5 is matters arising. So does any members have any matters arising from the previous meeting? No? Okay, thank you. Item 6 is correspondence. At page 18 you'll see the correspondence memo. There are 3 pieces of correspondence in relation to road safety of children travelling on school buses. Sorry, excuse me. You will see these at page 54, which is the response from the Department of Infrastructure, at page 108, response from TransLink, and at page 110, response from the Education Authority. So, obviously, I welcome the department's response in relation to it. and I just want to request details of options with your agreement to improve safety of school children being considered by the Minister when available, and then obviously to write to the Minister for Education just to ascertain what specific initiatives are being undertaken by his department to increase safety for those travelling to and from schools. And obviously there's a cross-departmental nature of this, so just to check in terms of the discussions that are happening between the ministers in those two departments and the departments themselves. Then are you in agreement with that? Yeah. And then I just also want to seek agreement that we forward the correspondence to the Education Committee just for their information in terms of what we've received so far from the Education Authority, if you're content with that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Keith.
Yeah, just on that response on page 50 for work, she's going to be, obviously, the Minister's going to get a report back as a matter of urgency. Do we wait just for a period of time to see when that comes to us? I presume there's no point in...
So that was in the first... I've just said that we go back, to make sure that we get that information when available. All right.
That's I presume that's going to be weeks and not months away, I assume.
Hopefully. Yeah. But we'll obviously have to keep that in mind and keep a look at that, to make sure that we get some information, obviously, in terms of what considerations and what discussions have been happening on that. Okay, content. Sorry,
just on
Peter.
6 point, there's I've got a couple of comments on, but just on 6.14, obviously the meeting is now taking place with Kate Nichol, my colleague Kate Nichol.
I'm coming to that. Just
Oh,
if I have a number of things I'm coming to, so if you just hold that thought for a minute, we're coming to that.
Okay.
So then, happy enough with that side of it, yeah? Okay, and then we are then at page 56. You'll see response to request for information on the department's consideration of TransLink's business case for a late night service. So I'm just seeking agreement that we request details on the stakeholders with an interest in the nighttime economy. The Minister hopes to meet, and information on the outcome of those meetings when available. Are you content with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also maybe get information on potential costings for the night buses. That's something I raised when I was a councillor in Belfast, so we're really keen for something like that. And any further information on the costings, the projected costings.
So we did receive that to the committee. We received that whenever TransLink, I think, were last up to the committee.
From memory, Chair, I think it was the end of January we received it, but I think it was in February. I can check on that point here, and I'll perhaps give me a minute and I'll...
Yeah. All right. Because it was, we had received the business case in terms of what had been put forward, and the costings were included within that. So we have already received that. Yeah. Page 57, members. You will see there 6.5. We do have a correspondence in from the Minister just in relation to the termination of vehicle testing equipment contract. Just to say, members, obviously there's legalities around this, but we will have a session next week with officials in relation to that. Okay, so I'm just referencing that to let you know that we will have a session next week in relation to that piece of correspondence. Page 58, you'll see a copy of the terms of reference for forensic accountant investigation into Northern Ireland Water, and at page 62 you'll see the response from the Minister for Infrastructure on the appointment of forensic accountant services to Northern Ireland Water. So I just want to let you know that, as undertaken by the Minister in her response, officials will be in a position to provide oral evidence on the findings of the review once complete. Obviously you'll be aware of questions too that were raised in the chamber this week, and we had our debate yesterday and it was referenced in relation to that as well. So I'm just seeking agreement that we schedule an oral evidence session in the forward work programme at a suitable date on that. Okay, yeah. And then I'm just seeking agreement that we write to the Minister to confirm the date of PricewaterhouseCoopers appointment so that the scheduling for oral evidence can be factored into the committee's work programme. Are you content? Yeah. Okay. At page 66, you'll see requests for the committee to consider the SL1 for the Green Road Conleague Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2024. So I'm just seeking agreement that we write to Ards and North Downborough Council seeking an update on its consideration of the proposed abandonment. Are you in agreement? Yeah.
Just how does this process work? Because I mean, I'm aware that there's been a bit of opposition to the removal of the bridge, if that makes sense, and what little I know, and not so much from that consistency, but in my own consistency, where their historic bridges have been removed, it is quite emotive and quite. It does draw a lot of concern. So I'm just curious about the process. I'm curious about how we can approach this and what our role is. Because I'm also aware that there's been petitions as well. So
I'll let the clerk come in a second, but this is something that dates back, I think, to one of our very first committee meetings here. It was something that we looked at because we were aware of the amount of objections that there was within the community, and it was something that we wanted to take our time with to make sure that whatever decision that the committee made would be right. But I'm going to bring in Phil, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, so as the Chair says, the committee had received correspondence of the Department's proposal for the abandonment, which from memory was to sort of facilitate a development and would require the sort of changes to the bridge that was currently there. And whilst there had been some objections to the Department's formal consultation, I think it was actually a party colleague of yours that actually laid a public position to the Assembly. So on the basis of that, the committee took oral evidence from the officials to sort of clarify, you know, the extent of the engagement on that. And from memory, the committee agreed that they wanted to perhaps ask the local council whether there was any scope for that to be, for them to take over responsibility for the site, and whether that could be adapted within the greenways, cycleways, etc. So the committee did write to the council and did get a response to say that the council had asked for a business case to be considered, or a proposal to be put forward by officials. And then we did get a subsequent correspondence in late October from the council to say that, you know, work is still ongoing and we'll keep you updated. But that's the last we've heard, Chair. So, I mean, it might be opportune to perhaps prompt the committee to write to the council to see what that has yielded in terms of next steps.
Sorry, Stephen. Yeah.
I know, just to agree with those, concur with that. I think it'd be useful to get a bit of an update and a bit of clarity around the current position from the council's point of view before we consider it properly. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why we're just writing to the council at this stage, because it was sort of left in a sense with the council, and we did get a response, and that's a number of months ago now. So it's just to sort of chase up where that sits.
And then from then, further actions will be come back to this committee then, or
yeah, I mean, obviously once the committee are aware what the council, whether it's its intentions to obviously take over responsibility or not, the committee will then need to sort of engage with the department to say, well, look, this is where we're at, and the department obviously will then, obviously by its correspondence, is keen to seek to abandon the responsibility for the site in question. So then it would really fall to the department to then progress that. But I think, you know, in terms of the minister's letter, I suppose she's just given the committee the opportunity to update her really as to what's happened, so that then they can obviously make a decision as to how to proceed.
Reference to writing to the council, I think that's really helpful to do that. The correspondence was helpful for me because it was good that it clarified a number of the concerns that I had about active travel, but in the next paragraph I wasn't as happy because it referred to like an incredibly old bridge as an old bridge. There is a heritage piece within that, potentially a communities aspect as well. So could we even just reference that in correspondence that would go to the council
Yeah, I think from memory in the October response, which I think is what you were referring to, they sort of said that the actual site wouldn't necessarily be most conducive for a cycleway, but notwithstanding your point now about potential heritage of it. So certainly we could incorporate that in there to see, if that is, being part of the council's consideration.
Okay, content with that all? Yeah. Okay, we're now moving on to page 68, which is a response providing details of the engagement undertaken to establish a number and type of health and safety incidences relating to reservoirs since the enactment of the Act. So, following its meeting on the 2nd of April, during which the committee agreed to seek detail of the number of health and safety incidences relating to reservoirs since the Act was enacted. The Department highlights in the correspondence, in the absence of further implementations of that, the Department has maintained regular communication with all known reservoir managers to remind them of their common law responsibilities. This would suggest that there is not any reliable data of known incidences, which, as members will recall, was sought to try and understand the extent of the risks to health and safety from our existing controlled reservoirs. You'll also wish to note that at our meeting next week, the committee will receive a briefing from the Assembly's Research and Information Service to provide a broad overview of the issues arising in the course of scrutiny by the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Development and the developments since the Act was passed. So obviously that will give us a wee bit more understanding of how the legislation passed through the Assembly back in 2015, and will give us hopefully a wee bit more knowledge around some of the aspects of that particular legislation then. So are members content with that for now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if this ties in with, but we have also 6.2. We know that we're talking here about the Reservoirs Act, and then 6.2. One of the first things is the business plan, and a lot of red things about it reference the Reservoir Act. So are we going to come back to 6.2 at all, or are we? Or is it because the two things are sort of connected, I think, here, you know what I mean?
So I suppose in terms of the business plan, I suppose the Reservoirs Act, because it is with the committee at this particular time, that's probably why it is at that RAG status of is it red or amber? Red, because we're taking our time as a committee to make sure that we go through that piece of legislation. Legislation is really important, and we're taking our time as a committee to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences of that. So really, the status of that within the business plan is because we have it in committee, and from a departmental point of view, I suppose it's delayed because it is with the committee, but I make no apologies for that, because it is legislation that we have to make sure is right, and that's why we have the anglers coming in today to discuss this with us. Sorry, Cahill.
No, Chair, and that's the right thing to do. This is an important part for the committee, but I mean, it's been around a long time. We need to move it on, but we need to have the proper stakeholders in at this stage to make sure we get it right. This is our big opportunity. I mean, to be fair, it should have been moved on, unfortunately, between changing committees and a load of things down through the years. But there's our big opportunity to get it right. So, and the sooner we engage with those people and do it, but there's a lot of body of work done already, But there's concerns and health and safety and all those things which will engage, obviously. Yeah,
and I suppose it's just those concerns, and the intervening period of time hasn't helped, let's be honest. And also the point of view of there's been a transfer of functions, as you'll know. That's why we have the RIAs coming in next week, just to give us a bit of a briefing and understanding of what actual scrutiny took place around with the Committee of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Development at that time, because I certainly wasn't about this assembly then, so I think that's why the status there in that business plan is what it is.
But then going back to the business plan, is there any? I mean, there's a number of things there. So there is. I mean, is it okay? I think the date was in December. I mean, is there going to be a future update on the business plans?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we normally periodically we get those business plans to the committee. Do you remember we had a discussion as well that we wanted to have further breakdowns in terms of why certain elements were, and do you remember we had a long discussion around getting some more information about that, but we, Clark, Phil, I'm right, we will get periodically updates on the business plan for the work of the department.
Yeah, so generally the business plan, obviously the department will work toward the objectives in that. At the end of the quarter they'll then update that once they have the data available to see what their performance has been during that period. Then normally gets considered by the departmental board first, and then once the board have considered those, they then will then come to the committee, and the department are very good at sort of sending those to us. So we've always got a pipeline of those, if you like, coming through. So but equally, if members have a specific interest on certain aspects, when we get the sort of the next latest update, you know, there's always options if the committee wanted to explore and do a general business update, business plan performance, which we did do last year as well. Then obviously that would be a matter for committee, and that could be something that could be scheduled and facilitated. But unfortunately, just with the nature of it, is always a little bit of a lag between the quarters, if you like, due to the clearance process. But yeah, we could do that.
Sorry, I see Mark's hand up there.
Oh, sorry, Chair, I didn't know if I'd put it up or not. I was kind of hovering over it, and it's regarding the business plan stuff. I don't know if it's the relevance. So it's like a treasure trove of topics, you know, and I suppose we'll have to take each one as it comes. There's a appropriate section from the department or given evidence or whatever. Obviously, there are concern where there are reds, but sometimes I think the greater concern is areas that you see are green.
Yeah.
Whenever you know, maybe the real stories behind the colour of green, and but sure, it's not for today particularly, but we'll revisit these issues in due course, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, absolutely. As you say, it is, whilst green might look good, as you say, it's the actual delivery of some of that and implementation of some of that on the ground is another thing. But anyway, we'll keep that in mind. As I say, we'll have the business plan and the information there. And certainly whenever we have departmental officials that come back and the Minister, it is something to refer to as well on those particular aspects that relate to those areas.
Peter, do you want to come?
Sorry, Peter.
You triggered a thought in my head there whenever you were speaking. Is this briefing the briefing that you alluded to? I remember that conversation about the detailed breakdown and if it was appropriate or not. I remember that conversation. Is this briefing in response to that, or is this just a regular briefing?
So it was more, that conversation was more relating to the performance, relating from the business plan. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think this is more of an update in terms of the periodic business plan that we would normally receive. Am I correct?
Yeah, so the committee had previously written and asked for copies of the divisional business plans, and obviously the Minister of That said that will contain a lot of information that might, you know, feature individual objectives and things. So
that's for a redacted copy.
Yeah. So well,
not to put the chair, but correct me if I'm wrong.
You know, so the committee had sort of, I think the Minister had suggested, well, look, we could perhaps provide an update from relevant directors. So the committee had sort of said, well, rather than going into what that individual's objective is in the department, let's get a sort of an update by each director on their relevant areas. So that's what that is at 6.2. It just gives a breakdown of obviously underwater and departmental delivery and so on, all of the relevant strands of work, and an update from the relevant director on each of those strands, which is obviously in a headline with the RAG status in there. But there's quite a lot of information in there, which is a useful reference document even for now, but obviously continued scrutiny.
So it is a response to the request of the committee.
Yeah, and not to take away a piece of work we have to do today, you know, in relation to the bill, it's this piece of legislation, so, you know, it's part of the programme. But
yeah. Thank you. Okay, moving on now. So at page 72, You'll see response providing information on the attendees at the roundtable discussion on regional planning, what issues were raised and what proposals were developed to inform the department's work. So just seeking agreement from members to request an update on any decisions on the next phase of the planning improvement agenda when available. Are you content with that? Or any comments? Content? Okay, thank you. So then at page 97, this is an update on the committee query regarding the issue of medical fitness to drive. Peter, you were looking to come in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just in regards, obviously Kate had written to the committee asking for a joint meeting, and I think I'd mentioned in previous, maybe it was at the time whenever she'd written in or subsequent to that, that I've received a lot of correspondence recently about this issue. So I'd be really keen if we can maybe get a readout of how that meeting went from the Minister, or if we just proceed now with maybe scheduling that joint health and infrastructure meeting, because I think it's a really important issue that would really require the presence of the Health Committee at the same time.
So I appreciate that Kate has raised this, and I think it is an important issue. It's within the public domain quite a bit at this moment in time, and obviously there has been media reports surrounding this issue, so it is a very important issue. It's a very emotive issue as well for an awful lot of people too, which has been referenced by the Minister in her correspondence. For me, I think that it seems to be that conversations are happening with the Minister, and I actually think, to be fair to the Minister, there seems to be an acknowledgement of this particular issue, and I think, to be fair, there seems to be meetings happening. So I think I'm still of the opinion that maybe, as you have said there, that we seek an update on the outcome of and the assessment of those conversations and those meetings that are happening before we then as committees go to have those joint meetings, because I think both health and ourselves are pressurised at this moment in time in terms of a forward work programme, but it does seem to be fair that the two ministers are working on this issue, and I think it might be prudent just to make sure where those are at, what the assessment is of those outcomes. If you're happy enough, I'm going to bring Cathal in if that's
sure.
okay.
No, Chair, I would agree with that, because whilst I agree with the member raising the point, there's a lot to discuss amongst this right across the board. They have a lot of homework to do, both ministers, get about and understand what their general aim may be collectively, and it's about equality and rights and everything else. So there's a lot of questions. Yeah. And we would definitely need all that homework before we even met ourselves to have a proper discussion. So I would wait back. I assume both departments are looking at all of those things.
Yeah, well, it does say there in the correspondence, I have asked officials to provide an assessment of the potential for introducing changes to the existing legislation to address the issue at this time. So it points to that there is obviously a substantial amount of work that's happening between the two departments. So I think rather than like the two committees where we would probably go round in circles with it, though the ministers have the officials.
Once we get that information, at least we could have a conversation across both committees.
And we know what the trajectory of the departments may be at that stage, which will then hopefully help inform us more in terms of discussion. Sorry, did you want to come in?
Also, we could just, as suggested, to ask for a readout of that. So, we could ask for a readout.
Yeah. Then we can see what we discussed and what the next actions are. I was interested in next actions. Yeah. I'm not interested in conversations for conversations where I think most people will know that about me. But knowing what's going to happen is a really important next step. And to assume makes an ass of you and me, Cathal, as well. You know that adage, So I think it's important to see
I don't mean that. I mean, I would safely say, and it's not even looking at it from a legislative point of view. If there's a change coming, there has to be a lot of questions asked, and it'll even scope outside legislation. To be honest, these are broader discussions. You know what I mean? That's the difference. I would like to have all that on the table, and then we can discuss it properly as two committees, as opposed to going and us say, what did one minister say, what the other minister say. That's all I'm saying to you. I have no But bring all the information to the table, and then we'll certainly have a proper.
As they say, knowledge is power.
Oh no.
So you know, it allows us, once we have the knowledge of what has actually been going on between the two departments.
I think it's you know, it's the right question to ask in the first place. But yeah, fair enough.
Okay, content then with the outcome of that we're writing, just to seek the outcomes and the readout from those meetings. Yeah. Okay, at page 101, you'll see response providing clarification on whether there are any minimum qualification requirements for land agents. So I'm just seeking agreement that we note and forward the piece of correspondence to the committee to the committees for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and to the Finance Committee for their information as well. Are you content with that? Keith?
I see it's down to the landowner themselves to be the judge and jury on that one, so it's basically ball back over the net.
Yeah. But content that we share it to the committees at this stage? Yeah. Okay, and also like we will have in the forward work programme, we have the Royal Chartered Institute of Surveyors coming in to the committee as well, so you'll remember that as well, so it'll be useful whenever that discussion comes around too. At page 102, you'll see response providing a disaggregation of the 425 million from the written ministerial statement of the 3rd of April 2025 in relation to the programme for government priorities. Obviously, just remind members that we did have the written statement in advance of the budget debate in April, and the Minister referenced allocations specifically for the programme for government priorities, and at its meeting on the 9th of April, the committee agreed to write to the Minister of Finance to request the disaggregation of the funding under each priority. So I'm just seeking agreement that we forward to all statutory committees for their information, if you're content. Content? Yeah. Okay. At page 104, you'll see correspondence from the Committee for Finance, including correspondence from the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee relating to type approval of motor vehicles under the Windsor Framework. You'll remember that this issue did come up whenever we had the National Franchise Dealers Association, whenever they came to the committee in relation to the vehicle emissions trading scheme, whenever they were given their evidence. So whilst not directly related to our particular role in the committee in terms of this, given that it is more likely to fall outside of this committee's remit, I'm just seeking agreement that we write to the Committee for Economy to establish what consideration it has had on this issue, and a request that we are kept informed of any areas that may be of mutual interest, because I would imagine, I'm not saying, but I would imagine in future we probably will have this raised maybe in other evidence sessions, so just to keep ourselves informed in terms of how this particular issue is impacting, I suppose, in terms of Northern Ireland and what other committees are doing. So are you content with that?
Great. Okay,
thank you. At page 112, you'll see response from the utility regulator in relation to enforcement notices issued by Northern Ireland Environment Agency. So I'm just seeking agreement that we write to the utility regulator requesting a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding when agreed. Content? Yeah. Okay, at page 116, you'll see correspondence from the Mineral Products Association Northern Ireland on the impact of the Northern Ireland Executive's 2025-26 budget on road maintenance, and they have offered a visit to to Northstone Craigantlet Quarry. So following our previous evidence on the 16th of October, the MPANI have reiterated its concerns over the potential impact of a reduced budget allocation to maintain our road network. And as I said, they have extended an invitation to the committee to undertake a site visit, convenient obviously here to Stormont, to provide members with an insight into the investment required to provide a quality assured material and a equally highly skilled workforce. So as a committee, we've heard in the course of evidence that the Minister has yet to make any final decisions yet on the budget, and this is acknowledged by the Mineral Products Association for Northern Ireland. So obviously we don't have the actual allocations received by business areas, so it's quite difficult to actually ascertain at this moment in time for definite what they'll be receiving. So just seeking views from members on this, and indeed their visit that they have offered to the committee as well. Just on the visit, before I bring anybody in if they want to, that visit, if we're minded to undertake, it would be combined with a committee meeting, because obviously we have pressures in relation to our own forward work programme. We will have legislation coming fairly soon. So this visit would then be conducted outside of our normal meeting to allow for the committee's work programme to remain as it is in the forward work programme, and so therefore the onus will be on members of this committee, if we are going to undertake a visit, that whilst it will be outside of the committee's meeting, that if you're deciding to go, we turn up. So does anybody want to come in relation to that? I mean, at this moment in time,
Where
we
is
don't
the proposed visit to, Chair? Have they given us
Yes,
options?
so
Craigantlet, is it?
Northstone, Craigantlet.
Up the road here?
Yeah.
Should we do it in the afternoon, could we?
Well, I was also thinking, the Minister this week referenced in the Chamber about the road maintenance strategy that she is currently, and her officials are currently looking at and developing. And it was interesting for me, the Minister mentioned the fact that she's looking into new technology and a more sustainable way of road maintenance as well. And I was just thinking, maybe if the visit coincided with some of that element of things as well, if members were minded to do that. We also have to be aware this is a business that we would be visiting as well. And, you know, so we need to take that into consideration too. Do you want to, in that sense of the word, do you want to park this for now and come to it whenever we can have it scheduled for a time whenever it is relevant in our forward work programme?
Chair, I'm not concerned about the business element of it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if we were here and at a meeting and that coincided with the visit on a Wednesday, 100% would be a reasonable thing to do. Whenever, now, I mean, I'm happy enough. Unless there's some nice spot down around here in Armagh, I'm even happier with that. But that's not on the cards. I mean,
it's a nice spot.
But Craigantlet's only up. It's not far away up here. So.
And the thing is, if we are having it after this committee meeting, make sure your diaries are free to do that, because you know, it would be unfair to say to a business, we are definitely going to visit you, and then have a very poor turnout from the committee going.
I'm doing
so
another day. I mean, there's no point.
Yeah.
You know, I was up here, I'd definitely do it now.
Sorry, Andrew, were you looking in?
No. Just a minute left. That's all. I'm doing the bike.
Sorry,
Just
Stephen.
but no, I think it has potential. You know, it is literally 5 minutes away. Obviously, into the North Down constituency, it would be good to have everybody. But
here we go, Chair. No, we're going to stop this because he needs a bike ride or a lift or something.
You could actually cycle up to
quite
steep, but it would. You know, you could tie in potentially for an hour, 1 to 2 hours after this meeting. You know, some Wednesday.
Will we scope out some options and then come back to the committee on it?
Back of Carol's point. We do a Wednesday afternoon, and we try and do our committee sort of not sharpish, but and then we'd up there because it's only 10 minutes away. And you know, people still have an afternoon after that.
Andrew could get a mountain bike. I mean, I don't know what kind of bike he has at the minute, but it's up the hill, so you get a mountain bike. We'll sort that out for him. I mean, that's good.
We'll not leave you stuck. Put it that way. Just might be prudent. Obviously that will work out in itself anyway. But whenever the actual figures of the budget are realised too, that might also help things as well. But we'll scope out some options and then come back to the committee. Is that all right?
Do you want me to come back in on the night movers?
Oh yes, sorry, yes. Phil's just going to come back in on the night movers.
So the business case, which is obviously sitting with the department, sort of estimates a cost of about £600,000 based on a 1-year pilot. But obviously, until that's either approved or reworked, but that's what we understand is currently with the department under consideration at the moment.
Okay, content with that?
Belfast Council dealt with now, moving on north down Belfast. Keith, you anything there over your way? No.
We don't have buses.
Oh, okay.
You got room bookings?
We're still trying to get that. We're still trying to get that sorted.
I thought I was talking about something else there. Don't record that.
Okay, members, obviously there was quite a bit of correspondence there in our meeting packs. Was there any other item of correspondence that anybody wanted to raise an issue on, or...? Okay, so I'm just seeking agreement then that members are content to note the remaining correspondence as contained in the correspondence memo in the meeting pack. You content? Okay, thank you. We're now moving on to item 7, which is the SL1's implementation of the Reservoirs Act Northern Ireland 2015. We have the Ulster Anglian Federation, I can't say that. Anglian. Oral evidence. At page 229 you'll see the clerk's memo. At page 232 you'll see the Ulster Anglian that's in my head, Federation written submission. At pages 234 and 404 you'll see the departmental cover letter, the 5 SL1s and the consultation report on the Reservoirs Act Northern Ireland 2015. At page 104 you'll see the Hansard of the departmental oral evidence to the committee on the 2nd of April 2025. So I just welcome to the committee today Ray McKeeman, Director of the UAF, and David Thompson. You're very welcome to the committee as well, Club Development Officer in the UAF. So I'm just seeking agreement as per normal that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. All agreed, yeah? Great. Okay, look, we really appreciate your time in terms of coming to the committee today. This is a really important issue. We had a very brief discussion because it is contained within the business plan, but as a committee we want to ensure that this piece of legislation is right, that it works on the ground for particularly the members that yourselves represent. So that's why you're in today. In terms of the further implementation, we already know that the Act is in place from 2015, but this is a further implementation of some of the clauses that are included in the legislation. So are you happy to talk to the committee for 5 minutes? Yep. If you don't mind, I probably will come in at 5 minutes because I want to maybe come to members' questions after that if you're content. So I'll let you now speak to the committee.
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today, and again we're here on behalf of the Ulster Anglian Federation, which is the national governing body for Angling here in Northern Ireland. We represent the vast majority of angling clubs and fisheries across Northern Ireland, and all of which are heavily involved in managing and promoting public access to freshwater environments for recreation, health and community wellbeing. And we do fully support the objectives of the Reservoirs Act. Protecting the public from the risk of failure is of course vital. However, today we wish to highlight the practical impacts that the proposed delegated legislation could have if not carefully supported and implemented. We do recognise the scale of the challenge ahead. So first, a controlled reservoir is defined as holding 10,000 cubic metres of water, of which Ray has informed me this morning is the same as 4 Olympic swimming pools. Okay, so since 2015, a national audit has identified 179 controlled reservoirs in Northern Ireland, including 28 that were previously unknown. And in 2016, the department identified 45 reservoirs in poor condition, and by the end of 2020, 9 of those were deemed to require urgent interventions, some of which have been completed. So this clearly underlines the need for a robust oversight, and we commend the department for taking proactive steps even before full powers are in place. That said, safety must be delivered alongside sustainability, but not at the expense of rural communities and recreational access and public well-being. So first of all, the financial burden created by the regulations is potentially not sustainable. Many fisheries and community groups simply don't have the resources to absorb these new demands. So the cost to bring reservoirs up to compliance standard can range anything from maybe £5,000 to maybe upwards of several million pounds, depending on the size, the site size, the age, the location, condition. And for some organisations, even the cost of a single statutory inspection would exceed their entire annual income. And in many cases, it would take years of fundraising to cover just the engineering fees alone. Without guaranteed support, many managers would have no choice but to de-water or potentially abandon these sites. And already we are seeing this happen from our end. We had 8 fisheries and around 2,500 anglers are being impacted and affected by preemptive drainage actions at sites such as Hillside, I think Boomers, Bog Hill or Bogle, depending on your interpretation of it, Strayed, I think there's one up at Craigan and Conlig. Now, we had one club that had over 80 members before losing its water, and now it only has 16 with little hope of recovery. So the impact extends far beyond angling. These reservoirs are community hubs. They're supporting outdoor activities that enhance health, tourism and local well-being as well, and local economies. So secondly, we urge that the reservoirs delivering the broad community benefit must be prioritised. We have reservoirs that are supporting not just angling, looking at kayaking, canoeing, triathlons, freshwater swimming, general recreation and dog walkers. People are just, people are using these sites. So we're kind of here to emphasise that they must be supported. If you think, and I know I've presented Andrew here before, there are 300,000 water sports participants and users within Northern Ireland. So yes, not all of them use these sites, but the vast majority of them do. So there is a potential to impact elite athletes. 6 out of 7 medals were won by NI athletes in Paris 24, and they were from water-based sports. 4 out of 5 of the Irish youth fly fishing team going to the Worlds in Colorado this summer are from the north, and they use many of these reservoirs for training and competition purposes. So what we're asking is that privately, public and accessible, closed off reservoirs with no access should not be the first in line for support at the expense of publicly accessible multi-use sites that provide these economic, health and social value for the community. They're at risk of being lost. These sites are vital, particularly in rural areas where alternative recreational facilities may be scarce or non-existent. Thirdly, we must protect accessibility for disabled and elderly participants. If reservoirs are managed by clubs and communities, and they've often invested heavily in the past, sometimes with public grant assistance, to build things like disability compliant pontoons, level access jetties and hard paths to waterside areas. And if reservoir levels are lowered significantly without thought, these facilities could become unusable. They'll no longer be able to reach the water, net fish or participate safely, and they lose their own independence and well-being, and that could dramatically render these structures useless, cutting off safe participation and excluding vulnerable groups. So we must ensure that public safety measures do not unintentionally create new barriers to participation. Just near the end here, so fourth, geographical fairness must be built into the approach. Regulation and funding frameworks must consider rural and isolated communities as much as larger urban areas. Reservoirs in rural communities in areas like Tyrone, Fermanagh, even parts of North Antrim and elsewhere are often the only accessible outdoor water facilities available to the community, and they must not be left to decline simply because they are outside major urban centres. Losing them would be devastating for regional equality and rural mental health outcomes. And finally, I want to highlight just the lack of clarity around who is eligible for funding and support. Because at present we have people coming to us, councils managing reservoirs are unclear whether they can access grant funding. Community-based not-for-profits face uncertainty about whether they're treated as private or public managers. And we have voluntary angling clubs often responsible for the day-to-day site management, and they're caught in limbo without no formal funding pathway. So this uncertainty is already leading to panic decisions, such as maybe dewatering with no clear plan for what comes next. And the legislation provides the department with powers to grant assistance, but powers without action are simply not enough. We need a firm, immediate funding scheme, not just permission for one. And in closing, the Ulster Anglian Federation respectfully recommends the urgent launch of a fully funded Reservoirs grant scheme along regulations. I know that's underway. A clear prioritisation of reservoirs delivering community recreational health benefits, protections for disabled and elderly users through sensitive water level management, a fair geographical spread of support, and a clarification of eligibility for all managers, public and voluntary. And as a federation, we stand ready to work constructively with yourselves, councils and other agencies to deliver safe, sustainable and accessible reservoir sites for all communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Like, as I said, we do appreciate your time. We appreciate you taking us through what are the practical, I suppose, considerations for the members that you represent. I just want to touch on the engagement that you have had with the department, I suppose, since 2015 and even recently. Obviously, as a committee, we've been looking at the grant element of it. I think it's fair to say, to be fair, it has been recognised that there is that need for a grant, and to be fair to the Minister, has been looking at the possibility of that. I think it's also important to say that may not be fully funded. And we don't want to give people a false expectation around that. I suppose considering the nature of funding and the budget within the executive. But what engagement have you had even with the department around that aspect of things? Has there been any conversations recently and engagement around that development of the grant scheme and what may be needed?
Yeah, I suppose I'll hand over to Ray to go on to the early engagement from even with yourself. So Ray's only came on to the Federation within the last couple of years, but Ray actually manages a reservoir, so he can give you a bit of impact of how it's his engagement, and then I can certainly tie up on our engagement post Ray's involvement, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think sort of the picture that I would paint in terms of talking to people on the ground, and I did attend one of the consultations. I think maybe the committee way back in 2012, 13, around before the Reservoir Act came in, and one of the things I remember most of one of those meetings was a farmer from a farming background. I don't know who he was or where he was, but he was able to stand. He stood up and he said, this piece of water has been in the farm for generations, and he actually stood, and his wife was with him, and he was crying of the potential impact that a Reservoir Act was going to have on what he regarded as a small pond as part of his farm. And certainly when I'm talking to members of the public, that when people think of a Reservoir Act, most people think of Silent Valley, vast expanses of water. My own reservoir is an old mill dam out at Strayed, which is 20 acres, and that's on the larger side of the mill dams. You have reservoirs that come under control of this piece of legislation in terms of, and they're 2 acres, 1 acre, really small pieces of water. And the fear that the farmer had obviously was that as you come down the scale in terms of the size of the reservoirs and into local ownership, whether it's a farm or a community that owns it, is that the capital costs that are going to be involved are going to outweigh any benefit that a farmer may have, and even and by association, many of the farmers will have leased them maybe at £1,000 a year to an angling club or a water sports group. The rents involved are very small in terms of what these owners actually possess, but the capital costs that, for example, my own reservoir at Strays, there was an audit carried out in 2016, and the information at that stage was a little again. The engagement was interrupted by the audit that was carried in 2016, then the hiatus at Stormont, and the uncertainty around that. I mean, was left that back then it was capital costs in my own reservoir in the region of £30,000. That was carried out by Rivers Agency, and there was a number of reservoirs, if not a lot of them, that received an inspection report that may have been involved in a pilot study in trying to quantify the potential capital costs that were going to be involved. And so other than my own reservoir, I'm not privy to the information of all the others, but it's scary. And in terms of communication and potential around who was or was not going to be eligible for funding, I would say combine all those factors together: Stormont, the hiatus, and the length of time over these number of years, uncertainty. And as David has alluded to, some of the reservoir owners, for example, up in Craigan in Derry, the council are responsible there, and there's an uncertainty around that they've experienced, and they drained the council and made the community, Craigan Community Country Park, made them drain the reservoir. I think it's by about 5 metres. And that's in the last 9 months, last autumn, out of the uncertainty as to what was going to be required and communication in terms of that particular example. I know personally that the council were citing it was going to cost millions of pounds to bring that particular reservoir, which up to standard. So people are waiting, and the smaller guys are feeling vulnerable, whether it's angling associations or landlords, as I say.
Ray, sorry, can I just clarify in terms of that 30,000 that you
Yes.
referenced there?
Yes.
Does that include your engineer's report on top? So that would be on top of that.
That was the capital cost in terms of upgrading the stone wall of the reservoir. That was the only report that I'm privy to.
Okay.
You know, and that wasn't including then the annual inspection or the 10-year one.
And they cost what, £5,000 to £10,000?
Yes, well, again, there was uncertainty. I'm only going back to my memory whenever we were again formulating the Reservoir Act. At that stage, certain information common was that there were no qualified engineers on the island of Ireland, and that it was because the legislation was in a sense following on from what had been introduced in the mainland over in England, that engineers were coming from there, but potentially they were back then we were citing sort of an inspection report around £3,000, and if you take that, that's 10 years ago, you know, for an inspection, where my as I say, the annual rent that clubs are paying for a body of water, small, is maybe £1,000, £3,000. An inspection report is it's a heavy hit. Someone is going to obviously take the hit. The domino effect potentially from, I have a landlord on my particular site, and he's going to look obviously at what he has had as an asset for 30 years or 40 years will become potentially a cost liability. Will these private owners of smaller pieces of water then offload those, sell them, potentially? I could cite Bogle in Hyde Park that was dropped and drained. The angling association, the angling club up there, lost their angling because it was more cost effective to go down the abandonment issue. We could refer back then to the Facebook PR disaster that happened, where there were pictures of dead swans and wildlife at that particular time, because it was an unannounced drain by the owners at that time to comply with rightly with safety issues, but the coordination, if you like, of it wasn't the best. But as I say, down the line, potentially even in a wildlife, we probably haven't. There are people talk about, you know, we don't miss things what we have until they're gone, and there's been a sort of a kickback. I potentially, we have to be careful, obviously, in the way we manage that, but the general public, whenever they realise that the piece of water in the village suddenly doesn't become available to walk their dogs, and the reasons why.
I think it's more about striking the balance
Yes.
of everything. There's more than one stakeholder, if you know what I mean. That's including the environment. But I think to go back to your original point was about our next involvement with the department would have been, we had a meeting, would have been December or January.
January.
The Federation, representatives from the Federation met with the Minister, Mr O'Dowd, and just outlined a couple of issues. Now, a more broader spectrum. I think obviously we're looking at things like sewage infrastructure and that, but part of the discussion did involve the Reservoirs bill and the impact it would have on communities and the sport. We did have a number of questions, number of asks, and I don't think we got a full. I think the Minister's changed and we got another response through, and I don't want to say that. I don't think we were any further on in terms of like the information we received. I think we were kind of like, felt like we got an answer, a positive answer in the meeting, and a different answer elsewhere, and it's something.
If you don't mind me asking, David, what was the difference in the answer? Was that solely relating to the grant scheme, or was that relating to another element?
I guess it was I'm looking at holistically. The response seemed a bit more. I think you come out with a bit more enthusiasm, and then once you receive it on paper, it's a different response. It's not a slight in the department at all, and I would probably have to go back and interpret it. But I handed to you, might read it a different way than I did. Obviously we're going in asking for something and we're not getting it, and so you can understand that how we are if we're representing over 10,000 anglers. It's a different. So we have to go back and report back the impacts haven't really changed, or there's no sort of momentum or no forward approach. But again, I'm happy to come back to the committee and address those, or see where we could take it from there.
That would be useful, obviously, just in terms of your assessment of that, because obviously as a committee we're drilling down into this, and we need to make sure if there is a grant scheme forthcoming that actually helps on the ground and that side of things. I just want to move on and ask you for your assessment of the number of reservoirs managed by community groups and not-for-profit organisations as well, because obviously that is something that will have an impact on those groups. And I know myself, an awful lot of these groups are organically, if you want to use that term, looking after the reservoirs. So just your assessment of that, if you have any figures or numbers in relation to that.
Well, if you're looking at, you're saying you've 179 controlled reservoirs. If you're looking, it's hard to say how many of them are under public ownership, because we know a lot of them, we know who owns them, but we know the owners lease them out again. I would say the vast majority of angling clubs that we have under our representation would at some way or other have access to a lake, or I say lake, we're still talking about the 10,000 cubic metres, so they come under a classed as a reservoir. I would say nearly all of, if not the vast majority of them. Remember, we do have some clubs without water who have lost their access, and we're trying to find them water. I'm aware that I know Dara control, they have the public angling estate, and you've got to look at some of those fall under, some of those are indeed leased from NI Water. So I couldn't quantify, but I'd say maybe in terms of clubs, you could probably have upwards of maybe 50 to 60 angling clubs that maybe at some point within there involved in some capacity, whether that's sublet from Dara or NI Water. And just think the bigger picture. Ray might be in a better position, because Ray is he's involved with fish agriculture as well, so he's stocking quite a few premises, so he might even be able to add to that.
I don't have a precise number, but I would say I would concur with what David has said, and that there's, probably a piece of work or getting that information in terms of those community groups, non-for-profits. Again, people, they tend to hide under the radar and they're very local. So we could probably do a little bit to find more information, a precise sort of number. We're familiar with the angling clubs, but there's a lot more out there. But I would say,
as a federation, we did reach out to other clubs to see if anyone had received a letter from the department saying, look, you need an inspection. I can say there were I'd say maybe about a dozen clubs who confirmed they received the letter, but that doesn't paint the bigger picture, because some of the letters were going to the landlords. So the clubs that were in direct ownership or involvement were receiving the letter directly, but the other clubs were saying, look, the landlord may have received that, we're not fully aware, we haven't been told. But like I say, we can say here there's maybe around 8 fisheries and around 2,500 anglers who are being affected by preemptive drainage. But that's not to say that the others who we would deem as, we would say, be at risk. You could be looking at maybe another maybe dozen or so on that who have actually received the letter. The figure could be way higher. It could go to the landlords, and there's like absentee landlords, some of the guys that take the money but they don't get involved. They receive the letter but they're not there, they're not passing it on. So they're, in the angling world, we are pretty anxious about what's ahead.
So obviously the potential is there's been clubs have already lost their access to a water body, but for that term, since 2015, I'm guessing, since the enactment. So in your view, do you believe then, given as well, you sort of referenced it there, Ray, that landlords are starting to consider, so do you reckon you're going to be in a position where more of your clubs are going to be left without any water courses
that would certainly would be my fear, and combine that with the potential. Everyone knows how most people are aware of how popular angling is in our part of the world, and we combine with the implications of what are the consequences of the Reservoir Act and the reduction in the public angling estate as well, which is going on within government, or the review of the public angling estate, and our expectation would be that.
It may link into the Reservoirs Act. If you're starting to look at potentially what's ahead. So again, we will be involved with the consultation process in that, but we're not privy to what's actually happened. But it may be something that yourselves could maybe ask the Environment Committee and sort of say, are there any of your sites that are impacted by this, and how is it impacting you? Because I'm sure they're going to have to go and get site inspections, and you can maybe be able to quantify costs for your own government assets.
I'm right in saying that in terms of the existing public angling estate, the number of waters that are involved there, which will cross over, would be public angling estates.
Of those 179 controlled reservoirs, I think you could be talking about 80, possibly 80 to 90 of those could fall
under the public angling estate.
Okay. And then lastly, just for myself before I come to other members who don't want to take up all the time, I referenced the fact, obviously, in terms of the grant scheme, which I think seems to be the main concern for some people as well, in terms of how they will mitigate the costs. Obviously, you have stated your wish and your ask and your want would be that it would be a fully funded grant scheme in terms of the groups that you represent, and I sort of referenced there and played devil's advocate in relation to the fact of budgets are what they are. That's well documented. I suppose in percentage terms, then, if we're coming back and we're saying it's or the minister, I should say, is coming back and saying can't fully fund this, and they're going through the business case, then what percentage do you think would be needed to allow some of the members, some of the clubs that you represent, to be able to carry out the enactment of this legislation but have that financial support?
That's a good question, and it's not a good question, if you know what I mean. So that would depend on, one, the size of the club in terms of membership base, the size of the community it serves, and secondly, the scale of the works involved to rectify. I'll give you an example. If you're looking at that club with 80 members there that I referenced, and if you say they're paying £1,000 a year to lease the site, and of those 80 members, say they're pulling in, £50 a head, maybe for a membership over the course of the year, you're starting to join the dots here. You're going to ask those 80 members for a further £5,000 for maybe a site survey, engineer's report, and then potentially what was saying there between 7,000 and maybe 7 million to rectify. We all know what's going to happen there. The work is not going to get done, and maybe the site will be deemed a risk, and you're going to be either dewatering it or totally lowering it, depending on the issues. You could go to another club there, and they could have, like we do have clubs that have upwards of 800-900 members, better managed, better sort of action plans, management plans. Finances may be there to a degree, maybe have some reserves in the bank, and maybe say they get a lower cost to rectify theirs. I'm not saying that they won't apply for the fund. It's hard to put a percentage on it. Those clubs would be better tasked to deal with that. So I think it's impossible to put a percent on unless you're looking at, that's why I was sort of going back to the point of the community value it serves. And if you think it maybe ticks these certain boxes, it's serving angling, it's serving different water sports or different public access, I could maybe put the onus back on yourselves and think, what's more valuable for you? And then you can maybe work out the percentage based on how much it serves the community, rather than it being potentially a locked gate up a lane somewhere and serving no access or benefit to anybody.
Yeah, there's not a one-size-fits-all policy, I suppose, is what you're saying in relation to it. Look, I want to come to the Deputy Chair first. John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you perfectly, thank you.
So David, Mary, thanks. David, Mary, thanks very much for coming along today. I think between your evidence session, which is very beneficial, and the Chair's questions, most of the important issues have been covered. But I just want to come to two things. If I may, I think it was Ray yourself talked about the vulnerability that many of the clubs and leaseholders feel at the moment. And I'm just wondering, in that consultation and ongoing engagement with the department, if you've highlighted just the level of that and the impact of the grant not being adequate enough will have on the clubs, and do you get a flavour from them that they truly understand the impact it will have and the cost that it could have on these clubs?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think particularly in the last couple of years, I think clubs are becoming more and more aware, and if we refer back to, I know we mentioned Craigan earlier, and when the impact it had on those guys in terms of dewatering or lowering the site, and obviously it's been very much publicised on social media, indeed some elements of the press. It's made the awareness, it's raised awareness with clubs and created a bigger fear factor that this is very much real. So if you're looking back to when the Bogle or Bog Hill Dam at Mollusk or Hyde Park went, I think it was around 2016, there was a great public awareness then, but then everything quietened down. But when you see more and more start popping up, and then clubs starting to say, it's like a domino effect, I think that Ray had said earlier, and the fear factors there, and certainly with the elements of social media nowadays, it's being used as a tool to raise awareness. So yeah, there is a massive fear factor, particularly when you see clubs are seeing maybe bigger, more reputable sites and clubs being impacted, and the smaller clubs are looking ahead and going, well, look, this it's not just happened to them, it can really much happen to, if it's happened to them, it can happen to any of us. So in the angling world, I think everybody is now starting to sit and take notice, and the fear is, are we financially prepared for that? And as I go back to the point I'd raised with Deborah just moments ago, So there are small clubs who aren't cash rich and just have enough to maybe cover their lease in a year, and they're the ones that are really, really worried. And that's not to say the bigger clubs aren't. If we get hit with if you're hit with a club that's maybe if it's a large club and they're asked for several million to rectify the issues, then we do have another issue here. So I don't think anyone's safe, and I think that's the way the angling world are starting to think.
Can I just add as well, again painting the picture of where I come from? When you mention angling, there are people sometimes perceive that as the of a strata in society of the bank managers, stroke accountants, stroke lawyers that are happy to pay £300 or £400 a day for fishing. What we're talking about, and certainly my own example of fishery, are guys that unfortunately the same age as me and a little bit older, retired, where 20 quid a day or 80 quid for a season ticket is a significant sum of money. You know, so if their angling club is going to have to then increase fees, for example, to cover capital costs like this, I very much doubt that the money is going to be there, so the angling club will potentially lose those members. You know, and so the working man, which I like to sort of think I'm sort of represent myself, the working man 50 something into 70 something is not going to have the resource to paint that picture. So those are the guys and some girls that we represent. You know.
No, I totally agree with that. I'm one of those passionate but poor anglers myself, and I don't think I'm a million miles away from you, but I'm only on the new line here in Carrickfergus, so I know the area well. I think the ambiguity for us as a committee around the grant funding, around the entire financial package, is frustrating, but for you, it's obvious, for you and the entire sector, it's incredibly worrying and incredibly disconcerting, and I think the quicker we have clarity on for everybody, the better. The other thing that I think you touched on was the impact elsewhere, and I think, Ray, you referred to it in relation to England. I'm just interested to get a flavour for what engagement you've had with counterparts in England and Wales on the back of the changes to reservoirs and control there, and you know, what impact did we see, and what should we be looking out for?
We haven't really had any direct engagement from them, but it's not to say that we can't. We work very closely with the Angling Trust over in England, and they're very good at, I guess, because we're in devolved governments, we can only really deal with our own and the interests of our own members. But that's not to say we can't open a further conversation with the Angling Trust directly and ask them to scale the impact it had on their angling communities and indeed their local communities. And I think going back to one of the points I want to stress, I know we came here and we're saying that we represent nearly 10,000 anglers, but if we look at it holistically, according to, I think, Statistica, which is used by Sport NI as well, I think there are around 80,000 anglers in Northern Ireland, so not all of them are in clubs, and they encounter people like maybe people here today that would go down to the beach for a day with a beach caster for the kids for a couple of hours. You know, that's what they're quantifying as angling. So it's a sizable portion of the public here. But in terms of linking in with England, I think that's something that we can do as a takeaway from this, and indeed report back to yourselves on the impacts that they've had. I don't think it's a difficult conversation to have, but at this moment in time, we've kind of just sort of try to get a feel for what's happening with our clubs on the ground, with our communities on the ground, and the worries from them. This is something we maybe picked up 9 months ago. We were aware of it, but it's worked at the same pace. Every time you guys do something, we have to react as well. So we're working at the same pace.
Yeah, I think that piece, if you could, would be useful. It's always good to learn from what went well and what went badly elsewhere. Maybe one of the benefits of coming late to this is that we can learn from those errors and pick up on what did go well. And just to pick up on your point about the volume, I read recently that there's more people go fishing at the weekend than go to watch the football in Northern Ireland, which is remarkable at times when we think about just how big that sport is. So maybe it's an opportunity as well for the Federation to look at the other departments as well, particularly Department of Communities, that what can be done to support financially there as well, and open a conversation there if it hasn't already been done.
It's interesting because I know angling is sort of quantified by licensed members, but like everything in the province, so someone who maybe sea anglers don't need to buy a rod license, so it doesn't quantify sea angling. So angling, they don't measure off licenses, measured off that 80,000 figure.
Right, no, that's all from me, Chair. Thank you very much, guys, for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. And obviously Fermanagh is very rich in terms of its history. Maybe John's going to move down to Fermanagh or come to Fermanagh to fish. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. It's a long time from we bought a course fishing license now. We were brought up fishing, but I certainly have, and I want to use this example. I know the Chair's touched on thing because the likes of round my own way in particular, the likes of say Yahan Dam, which is the Armagh Fisheries Boys have it, and I mean we've met on numerous occasions and they have concerns. And my concern, obviously, health and safety is a big issue for us. I mean, and there's no doubt in that, and obviously they've decided to go down the regulation route. But I would certainly be keen to look at how going forward, how regulation will work with those stakeholders who, are going to look after. They're the caretakers in general. I know landlords have responsibility, but at the end of the day, a lot of people use them, and that's they've raised those concerns for a number of years now. So, probably in the questions for yourselves, two questions in particular. I mean, have we done all the homework out there? I mean, I know you've quoted some figures in terms of funding, in terms of monies. And it's been around a long time. This conversation has been going on a long time. So, and we're talking about engineers and all that. But my simple question to everybody is, and for a better understanding for this committee, where are we in terms of knowing the actual numbers and figures? In costs wise, is there any indications, or have you a rough idea, or do you not know?
I could be brutally honest with you and suggest that's where we are with it. Literally just picking it out of the air. When I say those figures, I'm looking at some of those figures have been based on what's been reported to us. When I said upwards of 7 million, I don't want to name the particular site because I don't think we've got the permission to, but there was a site that was quoted or claimed that their landlord said it's upwards of up to 10 million to rectify the issues, which is significant. But if you're looking at the clubs, and
that's at the extreme side. I'm not saying all I'm saying for us as a committee when we delve into it, and that's why you're here today, try and get a better understanding, because I mean there's a process there for a grant scheme, so let's look at it and let's work that way, because I mean at the end of the day we've had the discussion.
So what just to come in, don't want you to think that we're asking for the full 7 million.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I just want a better understanding as part of the process.
So, and to quantify the other thing is the inspection report is significantly a financial burden on, so a bigger financial burden on smaller clubs. I'm in a couple of clubs and it hasn't really been an issue, but I would anticipate if it's a club, using that example of that club that we mentioned earlier, that would have a significant financial impact on them. And in terms of you're saying cost to potentially remedy, the cost that the research that we have done, we found the highest figure and the generally lowest figure was around £7,000 in terms of rectifying the sites to make sure they're up to compliance standards. So all I'm saying is it's a big variation between £7,000, several £1,000s and 10 million. There's no real in between. They're just depend site specific.
Can I just add again my own personal understanding? So I'm a tenant of a fishery. So the communication would have went, in terms of the communication over this issue, would have went straight to the landlord, who didn't automatically pass it to me. So what I'm saying to you is the word in the street in terms of what I was told was that in 2016, I think it's the Rivers Agency carried out an audit, and my understanding was that my own fishery was inspected, and I think most of them were inspected, and there was an estimated capital cost provided in each report. So someone somewhere should have a listing of the costs that were provided in 2016 in terms of that piece of work that I think it was the Rivers Agency that carried out. They got an inspector, and he came and did a visual inspection of my and provided a report. And I know that so that information that you're asking for in terms of specific costs, that may be there with if someone.
Oh, I'll just ask in the context, because I know once you bring forward the legislation, these questions need to be asked now and understood now. There's a provision for a grant. We need to understand exactly, because we don't want to pass it and then hand it down into the. This is the regulation, folks. Let's get on with it. So that's those and the chair of affairs asked most of the things. But we're in the same. We're on the same page. We're asking the right questions. You know, we're asking the right questions. Let's do a bit of homework. And
there's two aspects of where the grant could be useful. So if you maybe divide it into two parts, look at the first part to probably facilitate an inspection, which I think would be particularly useful. The second one, and I think this is the contentious one, when I know I was asked earlier about what percentage could it be, and I think you can't really put that aspect of the grant until you see what the capital costs involved are, because I understand your budgetary constraints here too, and you don't want to be using your whole budget fixing one site. You want to be looking at how much social and community value that, but you basically, it's cut a long story, you want to get bang for your buck, and you want to address as many as you can.
But it's value for money. I mean, at the end, I don't mind that, but we could go and crack at it now from the start. It's how we do this when we start out the process. The other one then is just finally, because I mean, and it's an interesting point you say, prioritising community benefit reservoirs. I mean, there's a lot of scope there. I'm mindful of the health and safety issues, to be honest with you, because you mentioned different sports and everything else. I'm coming out from an angling point of view, so a wee bit selfishly, because I've done it and know it. But certainly, can you touch a wee bit on that? How we can, there could be a way in retrieving that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost that we're here really because of public safety. That we've got to take away that it's just about angling. It's and another sport.
Absolutely,
Key thing here is the whole legislation is built around public safety. And just I'll say we fully support the idea of that and the goal. And again, our concern is that it has to be achieved in a way that it doesn't unintentionally, ruin the public recreation and community assets. And so basically, going forward, I think safety and sustainability have to go hand in hand, depending on the outcome. And I think that's the focus here. We're not saying all sites are going to be fixed. We just need to kind of make sure that there's a fine balance about, again, going into what social and community value these sites provide, off a site that's maybe going to need 20 million to rectify, and maybe it's down a locked lane and offers no community value at all, maybe not even used. So it's more trying to look at that. The other thing maybe draw attention to is the geographical spread. I know I touched on it earlier, but even when we have been having discussions with DAERA about locations of sites, some of them are congregated in around, so some areas maybe have several within a short area, and then you have some that are totally isolated, maybe one or two in the middle of nowhere. So it's about striking that fine balance. If you have 13 reservoirs serving one community and you have one serving maybe 3 or 4 community, you've got to start that's where the mind, that's where we are thinking of things. And certainly I'm sure these are considerations you can take on board when you are looking at how many people are using that site and how many. It'd be really galling to watch maybe that assistance go maybe for one site and the expense of many more that maybe doesn't serve any sort of community or long-term benefit. But we do recognise there are budgetary constraints. It's more just trying to make sure it's a fair and open and well distributed process.
Okay, Cahill.
Yeah, Chair, we have plenty of lakes too, Chair, but we're all right. Monica play his part now. That goes for sure, I mean, like that's it. So,
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation, and a lot of certainly a lot of good feedback has already been gained from you. So, just a couple of remarks. Apologies if I maybe didn't hear this, but out of the 179 reservoirs, how many of those are there any of those that are owned by angling clubs at the minute? I presume that maybe a bit of a breakdown on that if it's available in terms of how many are leased.
We can find out to the best of our ability, but I would say nearly all of nearly the majority of angling clubs that we have now that aren't on rivers. Most of them have rivers and have the thing, because what we find is with rivers, they become inaccessible at time, and these sites are predominantly used by elderly anglers or disabled anglers, because you don't want to be sending them up and down river banks or in rivers. So there's kind of like a natural progression from river to reservoir. We can certainly go back and try and get a more defined figure, but whether you get the full level of response is another thing. I would say the majority of our angling clubs do have access to a reservoir lake. Well, going back to the point it said originally, whether or not they outright own them or their tenants is the other thing. And we don't just represent angling clubs either. Just say we actually do have a lot of private put and take fisheries which are opening for community benefits, who are coming on they've came in for us this year as a result of this act. So they've come into us and asked us, they have different issues and worries and concerns, and most of what they have put to us are what we've raised today, but we could say we've got the majority of put and take fisheries on board. And
I would say, if I understand your part of your question, certainly the majority would be leasing.
Yes.
They wouldn't be in ownership of the angling club. That would be my guess.
Was that your question? Leasing versus ownership?
That's right. That was really the gist.
There'd be very few, if any, owned.
No, appreciate that. And it does, it introduces further layers of complications too for the users and the owners, and you'll have some owners that are more responsible than others and more interested than others, and maybe not even living anywhere close by, and in the same jurisdiction. So it's appreciate the challenges ahead and the voluntary, the value of it, we'll see in my own area and right across the country. I suppose, is there any experience or good practice that you have from anyone availing of external funding opportunities? I know capital works can be very difficult. I suppose it's quite a niche thing where it's a water.
Not on this side of the pond that I'm wholly aware of. I am aware, can't reveal the name of the site, but I'm aware of a situation where a landlord is in the process of dewatering a site to fix, to obviously for engineering purposes to make it compliant. But going back to the original point you're saying about lease fee ownership, we aren't aware. This is the next sort of issue. Maybe it could be something for yourselves to look at if you are contacting obviously the owners, but maybe put something on it where you have to say, please let your tenants know as well, because we do have a lot of angling clubs that maybe aren't just getting the letter, but they are leasing the site. The site is it would be classed as a controlled reservoir with 10,000 cubic metres. So the other issue you have, and potentially as an issue you have, and we have, is there's no communication between landlord and tenant. So we can't fully quantify what how many are directly impacted by that.
Can I just refer as well, I don't know the relevancy, the strategic angling review that happened in 2014. Certainly one of the objectives that were in it was reference, for example, provision of toilets and capital issues around fisheries, and that remained the capital side of the strategic angling review. To the best of my knowledge, access to capital funding was very minimal over the years since the strategic angling review in 2014. A lot of the issues that were identified in it in terms of capital issues around fisheries remained outstanding. So I'm not aware. I can think of one fishery that I know of that received funding in those 11 years.
No, appreciate that. That's helpful. No, I think a lot of points have been covered, so thank you.
Thank you.
Would it help if we went back again for the committee's benefit, if we consulted and done a wider sort of consultation for ourselves to see who actually leases and who owns outright?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
It would be useful, but I also stress time is critical for us as a committee. We would really love to have them figures so that we can, ascertain the lease and the numbers of, people that are going to be affected and all of that. So if you could do that within a short time frame, that would be brilliant.
You want to give me a deadline then? If you, I seriously, I could.
Yesterday.
That sounds familiar.
I suppose we are talking within literally weeks. Because next week we will be having another briefing in the committee, and officials will be coming back hot on the heels of that as well. So I would stress it would be great to have those figures to help and enable the committee, but as I say, we'll need to have them pretty quickly, because I suppose it's no secret the committee has, I suppose, delayed this actually coming to the chamber. Because we want to make sure that it doesn't have the unintended consequences. So from a departmental point of view, they want to make sure that we're going along with this pretty quickly. And from a committee perspective, yes, to a certain extent, but we just need to make sure this is legislation at the end of the day. So we need to make sure it's right. But if you can do that in a quick time frame and get that turned around for us, that would be great. Andrew, I'm going to come to you now.
I'll try and be brief, but I think a lot of good points have been drawn out already, so they have, and in fact you sort of touched on two of the points I've sort of maybe tried to draw out of. I think, just on the communication and the body of communication, because it does, my concern would be, is I think you've highlighted, is that landlords don't pass the information on, and then this just then, it's a story as old as time really, that groups that use will not have the information, and then it just the whole thing falls down, and it's shutting the gate after or lifting the net when there's no fish in it, or whatever whatever the terminology is. Just would you have a concern as well? I mean, just listening to this would you have a concern about and you talked about membership of clubs and big clubs, small clubs, but would you have a concern about anglers being, if things are being put out of use, that then anglers are then pushed into sort of a small concentration of lakes, and sort of what knock-on effects that would have?
Well, yeah, I guess if your lake gets lower and inaccessible, and your clubs and communities, and most of it through public grant funding as well, have invested in pontoons, jetties and so on, invested maybe tens of thousands of pounds in that, and all of a sudden they're useless. You can't, if I'm asking someone in a wheelchair or someone that of impaired mobility to start netting a fish in extra 5 meters, it's not safe. And so you'll find these people will stop coming to use these sites, and it has happened and it is happening. I go back to the example I used earlier from that, again going back to that Bog Hill site. A club was flourishing with 80 members within the Mollusk area, and now they're down to 15, 16. They don't have any water to go to, and the lifeblood of those clubs then becomes put and take fisheries, where they have to then travel outside of their own community area and start using other sites. But you have to remember, those sites aren't long-term sustainable either, because they're impacted by this. The point you'd raised about the issues with communication between the tenant and landlord, there could probably be even more worry if the communication was better between the two. We could have a lot more clubs reaching out to us worried about it, but those that have reached out to us, they're maybe not fully aware of the bigger picture or the long-term impact. But yes, to answer your question, if the sites become useless, people will stop going to them, and the clubs will stop investing into them because they can't afford to.
I'm not sort of angler two generations removed, you know what I mean? But I know my grandfather, my mother would reference it, that was his, before mental health and well-being was a thing, that was his thing, you know what I mean? And that's what, but anyway, and again, just sort of going on to some more sort of unintended consequences, because I know, David, I've talked to you, and we know your environmental concerns, and I suppose that then is, what are the concerns about these bodies of water going out of use, you know what I mean? Because, and again, anglers are very often the first people to notice the change of habitats, of environments. So I mean, I'm just
That's a fantastic question. It's probably one that we've really overlooked. I can use an example within the Antrim and Newtonawe borough of a club, as a result of this process, had to have their dam dewatered. Thankfully, they had another reservoir that they had access to, but they lost access. Obviously, the repairs were too much. They drained the whole site. And long-term environmental impact, and this is a personal experience, by the way. I just decided to go and have maybe 2 summers. I have photographs of it too. About 2 or 3 summers ago, could have been. And I could hear all the birds squawking, all the seagulls and all sorts. And I was like, it's sort of going on up here. I'll take a walk up. And I walked up there, and I seen a lot of the swan mussels. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're about the size of your hand, like big, almost like big oysters, you know. But they're sitting there, and they were getting cooked in the hot sun, and the birds were just coming down and pecking them. And there wasn't just like, you can go check them up, I think they're an at-risk species. I'd never seen as many in my life, thousands upon thousands of them. The birds were just coming down and eating them. Coming off that, I personally seen with my own eyes, I seen newts, again another protected species. So looking at risk species being directly impacted, the same site would have been used by otters quite a bit as well. But if you're coming on to the actual fisheries part, where we're going on to your dewatering water, and what's under the water is the fish as well. So, you know, we're unsure as to how many of these sites, if they're being dewatered, you know, are the fish being taken, or are the fish being left, or what, you know, we're totally unsure, but we're not involved with the process. So yes, there is an environmental risk, and certainly with species that are identified as at risk in terms of things like the swans, mussels, and things like otters, and inevitably newts. And I'd say I have photographs of that because I was so shocked by it.
Thank you.
But, okay.
Mark?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Chair, and thanks to the fellows for the presentation there. Been very good, covered a lot of the concerns and answered, I suppose, any of the questions that have been put thus far by committee. I suppose it's interesting to hear you talk about Craigan. Members in committee will have heard me mention Craigan Reservoir before. A multitude of issues there, one of them being the barrier or failure to address the infrastructural concerns, the barrier that's causing to planning decisions and economic development in the city. But the other impact has been on the fishery up there, and I know from speaking to members of that club, people who've availed of the benefits of it, you know how good it has been. It's literally been a lifeline for some people, but now they're left literally high and dry without it, and that's one of those sort of panic moves caused by uncertainty that you had alluded to in your evidence. Now, obviously, and you've talked about the cost to fix that infrastructure, and I know you're out here specifically to talk about Craigan, but surely that puts the fear of God and the organisations like yourselves and other reservoir managers or owners, whenever the department are now talking about working up a business case for a grant scheme, not to do the work, I might add, but a grant scheme that they cover the cost of inspections. So sort of like, we'll pay to inspect and then tell you how much it's going to cost you to fix. And I wonder if you could enlighten us as to maybe what impact that might have on organisations. Do you feel that people might just like throw in the towel and walk away, leaving reservoirs then completely unmanaged, unsupervised, and becoming a public health risk as well as a risk to public safety?
Well, I think yes. I would be fairly certain if I asked any of yourselves here now just to suddenly throw out maybe several £1 million to fix something, the first thing you're going to do is go, no, just do away with it, you know. And you can understand that. And yes, going back to your point, I don't think they would be left don't think they'd be left with water in them, put it like that. I think they'd be. I do think it would be, they'd be dewatered immediately, and we certainly have seen that. We have two very much working examples with some of our clubs where they've straight off dewatered it. It's not cost effective for them. But going back, we're absolutely necessary. Dewatering should be the last resort and not a default. And it's going back, dewatering damages the local economies, recreation. We've covered biodiversity and touched on community health. So going back to it, proper funding has to be for inspections, and proportionate repairs is probably the want for a better word, would be a better long-term solution to that.
And any grant scheme used would contain that shouldn't just be around the inspection.
Yeah.
There should all be financial assistance to cover costs of compliance also.
Yeah, because I know some sites can't afford the inspection, and maybe you could possibly consider a means tested approach for that, going forward. And again, going back to the homework I have of asking who owns what. But we could certainly you could probably look at a means tested approach for the inspection alone. But I think the knock on or the domino effect, as we've used today, could be that these inspections could highlight more costs and again create more fear. So it's trying to strike the balance. If it's mandatory to have these inspections, it's going to cost these clubs and communities no matter what. But then you've got to look at the knock-on effect of that. Could be that some of these could be upwards, creating further costs that are financially unsustainable and can lead to dewatering.
And John, when he was talking, and I know where he was coming from, but saying sometimes there's benefits in coming after other jurisdictions, and that you can learn from what they've done wrong and what they've done right. But I think in this case, those benefits are probably outweighed by the way that these costs will have escalated in the intervening period, over the last decade. And there'd also be a real concern, I suppose, you referred to the lack of local expertise when it comes to carrying out inspections, never mind doing the work, that even when the work or the requirements are identified across a range of reservoirs, the time they actually, even if the money was there, the time it will take to get it done, I imagine will be, you're not talking a couple of months, like.
Yeah, and going back to the point Ray had raised earlier, there's a guy who has to, place. Our engineers and the inspectors, surveyors they're being flown over. That's a big part of the cost. We have none on this island, and they're being flown over from England, and that obviously keeps the cost quite high too. So is it maybe something there we have to consider of empowering our own sort of communities and our own to maybe encourage that as maybe what an employment aspect, or developing something that where we can have a hub for that's maybe local. Could that maybe keep the cost down for clubs if we had someone that's trained up and local and qualified in this sort of level of inspection? Could the funding maybe look at increasing the amount of those surveyors on this side of the water? So it could be something that may, in the long term, cut the cost down for the inspection. If you get what I'm saying, I hope I explained that right. So there may be things we could consider,
You have, but I mean, if the expertise isn't here to carry out the inspection, I think it's fair enough to assume that the expertise won't be here to carry out much of the work required as well.
Yeah.
Just speaking from a wee bit of personal experience on another issue, locally it wasn't Pragan Reservoir, it was a lock. But no, thank you for your answers and your attendance today. Thank you.
Currently, it's a single point of failure at the moment. I mean, if it's everything, and again, you're talking about speed and transition here, it's all dependent on one person coming across to carry out the inspections, and if he's not available, now obviously it makes sense for him to do as many sites as he can while he's here, but you know how it is trying to get a lot of people with different interests who we can just about communicate into the same room. So yeah, it's another issue to consider.
Thank you, Mark. Last but not least, Keith.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have a few specifics. I maybe haven't picked this up. We talked about 10,000 anglers. How many clubs do you represent as under your umbrella?
Upwards, let's just say it varies. So you get people. We have flexible renewal points. So let's say it varies, but say upwards of 60.
Right. So you have 60 clubs under your umbrella. Okay. So, and I'm not clear on this 179 number of reservoirs.
Yeah.
So 60 clubs. Does that mean 60 reservoirs?
No, not necessarily.
So many reservoirs are you concerned about out of 179 based on your 60 membership?
I go all of them.
Oh, the fishing and all of them?
And the ones that facilitate angling. So if you look at the public angling estate that looks at maybe just say around 90, and then you got to look at the ones that the clubs maybe run. You could be maybe adding another 40 or 50 onto that again. So the rest could be like private drinking water or anything like that.
Your anglers, let's call them your anglers, could fish in most of them. Okay, fair enough.
Yes.
But how many do you think out of your 60 clubs has got responsibility for so many is their own, well they're owned or leased. How many is out of those 60 is directly under their responsibility?
Well, that's the sort of takeaway we took from your colleague's question here. So
if you're guesstimating, is it under 60?
It's going to be under 60 of outright ownership.
Somebody over because they wouldn't have two, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What's your understanding of grants? And I appreciate you responded to Mark. What's your definition or understanding of what the department's definition of a grant is? What do you think that, not to be in money, but what's your understanding of what you think a grant will be?
Well, I think a grant, and not in terms talking quantity or what the grant can facilitate.
Forget about the figure of it.
Well, I think we're going back to certainly the inspections is one. I think that needs to be considered, because I know for sure some clubs probably can't. Well, no, probably some clubs can't afford the inspection at this moment in time. If you're talking, it's around £5,000, and using that example, and the second part of a grant, how it would probably look for me, is you can look at the actual remedial works. And again, we're going back to the point here where the costs and burdens of at least if the inspection is mandatory, some clubs can't. And in fact, I actually think there are clubs possibly walking away based on inspection fee alone, the smaller ones. But then they get those that can afford it have to look at the next thing, and it's again the costs. So how does a grant look? If we're looking at they can't afford statutory inspections, we maybe want to consider that being a consideration within funding. But then the second part of it, I think, coming to Cahill's point here, was about looking at the actual remedial works. There's a double-edged sword here, and then I think the third one that teased out is obviously, even something with Mark there, was the looking at the provision of the engineer that the surveyor provides a report. So I mean, if we're already seeing clubs lose their reservoirs and their members and the communities losing that, we would expect a grant to maybe at least soften the blow in 1, 2, if not all 3 of those sort of areas. And I guess we can't guarantee that the grant is going to be the absolute solution to everything and tackle it, but we would like to see it come away where it's a fair approach, where it's going to be if the community benefit is prioritised over that. So again, going back to the point been written all along, I kind of want to make sure it's that any grant funding serves the communities and not just a private landowner, and that's it done and he can just lock it off. Does that answer your question?
It does. And one final, I suppose, point, it's not a question. 100 metres by 100 metres by 1 metre isn't that big.
No.
Like this room's probably 20 metres. So it's not a big area of water. No. People think Spelga Dam and you think big locks, but that's not a big area.
Significant with the history in terms of our part of the world. This mill dams, mill dams back to Mount Straight, 200 years old. In that time period where a body of water, anywhere that could hold water, some of them are really in terms of exactly, as you say, 100 metres by 100 metres.
Right.
And that's a fantastic point, and I think that's something the department could probably push from behind the scenes, is the perception of the 10,000 cubic metres. Again, everyone's thinking it's massive controlled reservoirs, you're thinking in the Silent Valley and things like that, but in reality some of these are almost lakes and
describe ponds
holes
in the ground.
But there's 179, and based on your point earlier, the DFI done the report years ago. Let's say you redo that, because time will create deterioration. What would your thoughts on being on the department, instead of paying all these individual grants at £5,000-10,000 tell everybody, why did they take out that work, and at least hand you a piece of paper to say that's what your reservoir needs, initial point one? Because that's going to have to be more cost effective.
Are you coming from the point where the survey is carried out by the department on
at that point that it then becomes yours? They're carrying the survey out purely from a cost effective point of view.
Yeah.
Because
and
if
you're
you
handing the report to the tenant,
it's now, wouldn't say it's your problem, but there's our report would be found.
Yes. I think that would be a fair.
Because that's going to work on a lot of money if you're doing grants for 179, whereas if you employ it and provide the document and then look about grants to assist with the work, depending on the prioritisation of those.
I think that would work, but the risk element, you need to make sure it wasn't taking too much out of the budget for the remedial works to fix, which could be, you might be handing out, you could spend your whole budget on getting the assessments done, and that's fine, but then it comes to remedial work, these sites are going to be left possibly still in the next situation. So you want to maybe, and it's a good, you maybe want to strike the balance and maybe come back to a means tested approach for that would be really good. I just would hate to think that we'd spend the entire budget on telling people what's wrong but not actually fixing the problem, or we're going to be here down the line.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I just want to come back on Keith's point there, because we did have correspondence. We have been asking the department in relation to how they calculated it. Take my chair's hat off for 1 second. I remember, looking back at the time the legislation was going forward, there was an amendment that was put down to try and decrease that 10,000 cubic metres at that time, but it obviously in the course of the legislation going through that didn't actually then get accepted and happen. But in the correspondence that the Minister has come back to the committee, they've said that any water held within the reservoir which is below the natural level of the surrounding land will not escape the 10,000 cubic metre threshold is determined by the capacity of the reservoir to retain the water above the natural ground rather than the volume of water in the reservoir at a given time, which is something to obviously take into consideration.
There's a bit of working out of that.
Yeah. Cathal, you were looking
just there's an interesting point that Keith mentioned about your numbers, but other people are listening in as well. It may not be connected, that's going to impact. There's other angles, but there's other, you mentioned kayaking and there's different, and it's right across the community, and that's an important factor as well, so let's gather them all together.
That goes with, I'm trying to draw Andrew in there because he was part of
it. No, he was going up the river. He was trying to get into the locker.
I'm taking the bait because Andrew we attended the day presenting the Clean Water Sports Alliance. Andrew had hosted us up here, and we were representing as a coalition of 300,000 water sports users, so that's to give you an idea of quantity, and of which 80,000 anglers fed directly into that, and that was encompassing the non-licensee anglers as well, so just to give you that. But where it's 300,000, probably a good, he's an angler, some of yourselves there, and looking at John, he's not there. But there's a lot of people just do both. You're on the beach, you'll do it, but you're in land, you do it. But it's giving you an idea that 300,000 figures, something that the Northern Ireland Sports Forum have collated. We've worked with Andrew and some of the other departments to drive that.
Look, thank you very much for your time. Apologies, I suppose, at the start for keeping you waiting. I just wanted to come back on one point, which I think we've referenced quite a bit during our conversations today, but it is something that we're going to have to take cognizance of as well. It's in relation to the leasing element of things, and I know Andrew sort of pointed to that as well about the correspondence and who that goes to. I suppose, do you feel that there is maybe, landowners potentially, I'm not saying that this is the case, but landowners potentially are going, well, the club's operating, they could be the reservoir manager so that I'm off the hook in relation to this.
Yes, and I think that goes, I know I raised that at the end of the evidence brief. I think it said that it's more that lack of clarity around who was eligible for funding and the support, and I think the management element that we had councils who are managing reservoirs saying, well, we don't know if we're eligible for this. And then we had not-for-profits, I think, when Mark had said there about the Craigan site. You know, we're saying they're an uncertainty of whether they're private or public managers. So it's maybe there's a bit of ambiguity around the definition of who owns what, who's responsible for what, and again going back to the tenant and lease, what onus or responsibility. But I guess if you dug a bit deeper, the lease agreement itself would determine that.
But it could be.
That's where it could be.
In the legislation, there is obviously the reservoir manager is named, and I suppose as well, whenever you're leasing out, leases can be very different depending upon, you know, and it could be written into leases as well, like you're responsible for any remedial work that may take place as well in the land. So, you know, there's that aspect as well in relation to for the clubs that you represent. There will be those there'll be those individualistic approaches to it,
Each one could be
depending upon
differently.
how their leases are. How their leases have been signed, what that includes, and then obviously, you know, you'd like to think that, you know, the correspondence would be going to the reservoir manager because they are named as the person that would be responsible in the actual piece of the legislation.
And as you say, leases are obviously lease specific, and you could have someone that's paying £1,000 a year, someone's paying a peppercorn a year. Someone's maybe terms and conditions could be the maintenance of the site, and some people could say that the landlord, so it's like if you're renting a house or something and the boiler's broke, that they come in and fix it. That's probably the next issue you will have, and it would be determining who's responsible for what in a lease, because if you're asking someone to pay 10,000, anything from several £1,000s to maybe a couple of million to fix a site, there's going to be a wee bit of a to me to you scenario, and you kind of want to step away from that.
Mark, I just see your hand up quickly if you want to come in.
Yeah, it was just on that ambiguity. I mean, from my experience here locally, that ambiguity doesn't just create difficulty, it has the potential to create real danger as well when no one's quite sure who's responsible. You don't often have someone take responsibility, and that can lead to, you know, issues around ongoing maintenance, security, keeping people out, as well as making sure people can come in.
And I think going back to that, Mark, it's a great point. I think we're here about safety first and foremost, and if that onus of responsibility isn't defined, then there is a risk to certainly health and safety, and that's a fair point that you make.
Yeah, and I suppose just reverting back to legislation as it is, you may have reservoir managers who inadvertently, it's an offence if they're not, you know, carrying out and enacting in terms of the legislation, and they may inadvertently not be aware to that or live to that fact.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, there's homework to get on with. I just wanted to let you know in terms of the time scales. I was just looking that up whenever some of the conversations was happening in terms of our forward work programme. Really, I'd be looking at in the next 2 weeks. We really are in a tight time frame in relation to it, just to get some of that information back, if at all possible. That's the sort of time frame that we're looking at, though. You know, obviously the committee will be taking their consideration of everything as well, but if at all possible, it would be great to have some of that information.
Or the 14th of May then?
If possible, yeah. And look, the clerks will be, the clerks can keep in touch with you in relation to that, and obviously have an offline conversation just in relation to that, if that's okay, David and Ray.
Yeah, that works okay.
They'll have a bit of an offline conversation with you just around that, and in terms of the committee's ongoing look at this. So in terms of the things there that we talked about is I think John had talked about you'd said there that you might report back in terms of some of the impacts elsewhere in other jurisdictions to see if there was some information on that, and obviously come back with some of those precise numbers around the groups not-for-profit, leased, and that type of thing as well. And then if you wanted to just check, I know it was right at the start of the committee meeting, we talked about the meeting and your assessment,
Yes, that's
and
it,
what
yeah.
might maybe be different from your assessment of that meeting, and then what you received in writing. That it just helps inform us in terms of the trajectory of some of the conversations and engagement that you've had.
Yeah, I think it's just the same with everything. Everyone comes in and asks, and if you come out with what you don't want, you're probably a wee bit biased to it. So I'll certainly have a look at it and then chat with the team and report back. But there, like I say, this was only like about maybe 1/5 to 2/5 of what was discussed in that meeting.
We've all been there in those types of meetings, believe you me. But look, we really do appreciate your time today, and thank you for coming in and giving us some information of the on the ground impact of this piece of legislation. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. And sorry for all the homework.
It's okay, miss. Get it done.
Thank you very much.
All the best, thank you.
Thanks.
What happened to you,
Bye.
Lord? There's money like that now, miss.
Get lines.
Sorry, Mr.
Erskine. Look, there was a couple of things there that I had sort of thought of as well. I mean, they little bit concerned just around that lease aspect and the ambiguity that there is there, and reservoir managers and who's responsible and the correspondence and where that goes to. I think that's really
You know what's going to happen out of it. I mean, it's just, there's going to be communication breakdown.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if maybe we're going back to make sure that the department that they have their, you know, how often do they update their data? What does it mean in terms of, just to clarify what it means in terms of the leasing of land to clubs and private organisations as well. I was also thinking around the cost to reservoir managers who are on the publicly owned land. You know, you've NI Water, you've councils there, in and around that. Did you want to come in on that or anything?
No, I think it was just from the point of view for members that the original 2015 Act does refer that obviously reservoir managers have responsibility, and in the absence of a designated reservoir manager, the landowner is default the reservoir manager, if you like. And I suppose really one of the things members might want to consider when considering these statutory rules or the proposals is that as indicated by the UAF there, that it's possible that is someone who leases from a landowner a reservoirs manager.
But I suppose if they put their hand up to that, they are.
Yeah, but but the lease may be, and I suppose the lease might be just limited that you have use of it, but are not the and I think that would be a distinction that I think even just for clarity for everyone, but it is who is ultimately responsible.
That would need to clearly be defined.
Yeah, and the 2015
that has to be
Act
defined.
does,
I mean, where's
nobody's going to be putting their hand up to that too quick. Well, the landowner or the angler club, for example, because the minute they put their hand up,
it's not going to be a case of that. That's not going to be. Once it's defined in legislation, it's defined.
Yeah, well, and it is defined. Yeah, absolutely right.
Once it's defined, so we need to find out, that part.
Once these statutory rules are implemented, this will allow the department to undertake with the registration, and I suppose really it's the point that members may just need to be mindful of that. There may be clubs that are leasing but are not the reservoir manager, but could perhaps unknowingly become the reservoir manager and then be liable. And there are offences within the 2015 Act.
That's where, even if it's defined that the reservoirs manager is the person that's using it, or he or she, that's fair enough. But you'll find then somebody will say, well, hold on, we don't want this responsibility.
Yeah.
And then
there'll be an enforcement element of it.
Yeah, and that would go back to the
owner. Unless someone can prove
that's the point. You know,
that the lease is strong enough
going to happen.
you're responsible.
That's what's going to happen.
I mean, we do have, obviously, on the 14th of May, the officials coming back to the committee again. So, you know, it may be worthwhile just bearing in mind some of these things for when the officials come back, that we get some of the clarity in relation to this, and obviously on the back of any further information that we get from UAF as well.
I think, Chair, to be fair, we had some of those conversations. I mean, if you look back, but it'll be defined there one way or another. But I need to sure we erased it. But let's go after it again and see exactly.
And I think it's also, to be fair to the department, it's only once these statutory rules are implemented can they then go about with the registration and finding out who the registrar manager will be. So I think it's just there again. It's just for really more members, informing members in terms of these proposals, really more than anything. But
and therein lies the confusion.
Yeah.
Or well, therein lies the conversation of what I mean. That's fair enough. I mean.
I felt that there was a good point raised just in relation to, obviously it's not for this committee's remit, but it is one of the I suppose outworkings or consequences of the Reservoirs Act. Obviously they were talking about the reduction of the public Anglian estate and the environmental, I suppose, impacts as well, and would it be worth writing to the Agriculture Committee and the Minister just to or write to the Minister and CC in the committee just in relation to what conversations or has his department, in more recent times, even though the legislation has moved from his department to DFI, taking a look at the impact in terms of, they were talking about dewatering of reservoirs and the potential increase for that to happen. So has his department taken any consideration of that, just given, there's a consultation on the public Anglian estate?
Well, I was going to add that consultation, just from general casework, if you will, that consultation is ongoing, and it's still it's a public audit, or it's an audit of the Anglian estate that's going on, and there's an awful lot of I segue into sort of other Anglian issues that can't get licenses and all the rest of it. So there is a body of work ongoing there.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, the environmental concerns are fairly acutely raised there. So yeah.
I suppose it'll be just interesting to see if that comes out from any of that consultation work, whether it is referenced as part of that consultation by some of the groups as well. Just think it might be worth bearing in mind. I know it's not wholly the remit of the committee or anything like that, but it's just also, it was just something that was raised during the course. Keith, did you want in?
179. Did we get a breakdown of who was NI Waters and privately owned? Was there some figures in that? Whenever the lady was in, did she not mention what those figures were?
I need to just check the Minister's
It'd be good to understand
today.
how many of those is accessible to the public.
Sorry, I'm just getting this up here.
I think the lady answered us. I can't remember the figures. There was so many NI Water, and there was so many privately owned.
can perhaps check that out.
Yeah.
Next week.
Yeah, check. We'll double check.
We'll perhaps come back with you on next week on that, just to review that.
It's to try and understand, that's why I was trying to drill into what's the impact to the anglers. I know they're fishing lots of them, but the financial impact is going to be possibly 60 or less.
So even if you look at the Minister's correspondence from today, page 70, right? So you have the breakdown results of the Reservoirs audit 2016. So you'll see there, it even talks about 46 excluded, and then in brackets managed by NI Water. But we'll get it for definite. Keith.
Sorry, the little table there, yeah, see it now, yeah.
But we can get definite figures and just make sure.
Yeah,
would that be
if
okay?
we've received them, Chair, but we can certainly check that just to see what we have received.
Yeah.
But I mean, I suppose the most substantive evidence we took on this was at the on the 9th of oral evidence on the 9th of April with departmental officials, and obviously we'd considered this written update from the department on the 2nd of April. So this response flows from the 9th of April's meeting. I don't recall there was anything in the end of November when we first considered the SL1s, purely because we'd asked for those to be reworked anyway. But let's say we can check 100%.
Possibly Liz next week will be able to shed
Yeah.
some light on that as well.
Yeah. All right. Okay, anything else, or happy to move on?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we're now moving on to item 8, which is the SL1, the Kensington Avenue Banbridge Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2025. At page 421, you'll see the SL1 proposal for the statutory rule. At page 423, you'll see the map for the proposed statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Bear with me. The purpose of the rule will be to abandon an area of 165 square metres of adopted verge on Kensington Avenue, Banbridge, to the rear of number 44 and number 46 Castlewellan Road, Banbridge, upon completion of such works as the department considers necessary to provide alternative facilities. The abandonment has been requested by JPC Consulting on behalf of Monteith Homes Limited and is required to regulise the situation on the ground and to facilitate a planning application made by the owners of number 44 Castlewellan Road. The ownership of the bed and soil falls between the respective owners of 44 and number 46 Castlewellan Road, both of whom have fenced in the verge. Following the abandonment, the land will revert back to the respective landowners. The department will benefit indirectly as the additional work being undertaken will provide a footpath and improve sight lines around the bend. So are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content? Thank you. SL1, the Rathenraw Industrial Estate Antrim Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2025. At page 425, you'll see the SL1 proposal for the statutory rule. At page 427, you'll see the map for the proposed statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. The purpose of the rule will be the rule will abandon an area of 1,453 square metres of turning head located between Unit 11D Rathenraw Industrial Estate and 15 Rathenraw Industrial Estate Antrim, commencing at a point 22 metres east of Unit 8 Rathenraw Industrial Estate and continuing for a distance of 60.15 metres after completion of such works as the department considers necessary to provide alternative facilities. The abandonment has been requested by an adjacent landowner so they can exercise more effective control over this area of land which they already own. It will also relieve the department of its ongoing maintenance responsibilities for this land. So are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Okay, thank you. Then item 10 is subordinate legislation. SR is not subject to assembly procedure, so advise members that there are 2 statutory rules that are not subject to assembly proceedings and are not required to be laid. These are at pages 429 to 451 of the meeting pack. So we have SR 2025-74, the road raises Spalmount Hill Climb Order Northern Ireland 2025. SR 2025-75, the road races Northwest 200 Order Northern Ireland 2025, and the SR 2025-76, the road races Main City Stages Rally Order Northern Ireland 2025, and we have the SR 2025-77, the Parking Places on Roads Diplomatic Vehicles Order Northern Ireland 2025. So just remind members that the committee noted the proposal for the statutory rules at its meeting on the 2nd and 9th of April 2025. So are members content to note the statutory rules? Content? Okay, item 11 is subordinate legislation, SL1s. SL1 is not subject to Assembly proceedings, so advise members that there are two proposals for the statutory rules that are not subject to Assembly proceedings and are not required to be laid. These can be found at pages 453 to 457 of the meeting pack, and they are the SL1, the road races, Drumhawk Hill Climb Order Northern Ireland 2025, and SL1, the road races, Tandragee Order Northern Ireland 2025. So have any members have any issues they wish to raise in the proposal? So members are content with the proposals for the statutory rules? Content. Okay, so we come to item 12, which is our forward work programme. At page 459, you'll see the draft forward work programme. And I'm just seeking agreement that we proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft forward work programme and to reflect any decisions taken today. Obviously, members, you'll be aware that the clerks were in touch with us just in relation to Belfast Harbour Commissioners as well. So we look forward to that meeting in due course. Everybody content? Okay, item 13 is any other business. So does any members have any items of business that they wish to raise at this moment in time? No? Okay, thank you everybody. So the date, time and location of the next meeting is the 7th of May at 10 a.m. here in room 29 Parliament Buildings. Thank you everybody. I now adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound.